2.5 decades later, and you look at around and say that how payments have become so much simple. If you want to make a payment for your bill, you have a QR code, just scan the dynamic QR code and the payment is done. And of course, India clearly being a leader there in terms of the number of digital payments we're doing.
Today with embedded payments, it's just frictionless. It's part of your journey. You don't even realize when you started shopping and when you ended up making a payment and walking out. From the consumer side, if I have to take the merchant side of the conversation, what is the change you foresee there?
That itself has been a fair bit of an evolution.
Namaste and welcome to Fintech Pulse series by Comviva. In this podcast series, we will be discussing various aspects which impact fintech, especially in the payment space. This is a start of a series, and this is the first podcast I'm having with Srini. Srini is the head of fintech business for Comviva, Chief Transformation Officer plus Chief Business Officer and Chief Operating Officer. So Srini, welcome. This is the series which we are starting as a release of our book, the Embedded Payments Research book, where we have interviewed several CXOs across various industry verticals, banking, fintech, merchants, and that book has brought a lot of insights into how people are perceiving embedded payments as a space, an evolving space, and it clearly book states the kind of excitement that's there about this space. So before we get into embedded payments, which is kind of today, you started your journey when probably electronic payments were at its very nascent stage. It used to be a very painful experience to make payments. We had to do at that time EFT codes and so many codes, etc. to where we are today in terms of universal payments, and then into embedded payments. How would you look at this 20 years of change that has happened?
25 years probably, but one thing I know of the change is that I've got grey hair now. So those were the days when probably before I get to online, using a card, you go to an ATM machine to withdraw and then make payments. So I guess that's where our journeys really started. But in the context of online, and probably that's where I've been involved in a lot of transformations, if I may, it's been quite interesting about how things have evolved, right? One is in the context of cards being only credit cards for payments. People who had debit cards never could pay. And of course, then we got in aspects like net banking or direct debit, as what others would call it outside of India. And that itself, registering for internet banking once was probably a 1-month process.
Yeah.
So from there, where it's more about transferring for funds rather than really making for payments online at an e-commerce store, now during that process, I remember once one of my CTOs at the bank talking about and then kind of pushing people to say, could you do direct or rather a debit push? And I would never understand what he really meant. But now, probably the 2.5 decades later, and you look at around and say that how payments have become so much simple. And I understand what a debit push is all about, where if you want to make a payment for your bill, you have a QR code, just scan the dynamic QR code and the payment is done. Or if you want to kind of order through any of the food apps and the mother, use any other payment app to kind of complete the transaction. I think life has come quite a distance in the payments world. And of course, India clearly being a leader there in terms of the number of digital payments we're doing.
And that's the change which even our research articulates, where payment was something, a chore, a burden, a process by itself. You need to make effort to make payment. It just didn't happen. Today with embedded payments, it's just frictionless. It's part of your journey. You don't even realize when you started shopping and when you ended up making a payment and walking out or checking out if it's a digital merchant case. So that's the transformation which we have seen, and where merchants are also getting excited about it. From the consumer side, if I have to take the merchant side of the conversation, what is the change you foresee there, or based on history and what is happening today?
I think the word embedded means it shouldn't be visible, right? In a sense,
Yeah.
it should be so naturally seamless in the overall commerce flow, if I may, in how a payment is therefore processed. So, as you rightly said, it becomes so much easy for the consumer. Won't really realize how and things are panning out. To that extent, it could also be reducing your loyalty points, and the rest is what you really end up paying through your bank or a card or whatever. But in the context of a merchant, as you rightly said, that itself has been a fair bit of an evolution, isn't it? Of course, there's a different maturity curve depending on the size and technology curve of a merchant, right from having discrete payment methods and then kind of trying to figure out how do you ensure that one payment method is accepted for the consumer, to the reconciliation. I think a lot of times we miss out that aspect. When you kind of tie up with multiple payment gateways and multiple payment instruments across different service providers, how do you reconcile? How do you ensure that overall checkout experience for the consumer becomes that much seamless? Is where we are seeing, at least I'm clearly seeing merchants and digital enterprises putting a lot of emphasis on, and they believe that payments once upon a time considered as probably what you rightly said a chore or not their part, now becoming their part as much, because it's not just about a seamless experience, but there's so much of insight that's coming in from a consumer depending on what kind of a segment is paying for what kind of paying through or what kind of a payment instrument, are something that hitherto was probably not really understood. And then they could even personalize their offers, their ways of reaching out to customers. So I think that's where the digital enterprise is really evolving.
That's a nice point, Rupert. Say personalization. In fact, I kind of feel today the shopping, the payment, and the reconciliation or overall process is turning into one. If I have to take Amazon Mart as an example, where your shopping cart itself is an experience, physical shopping cart, you put take out, payments get debited, it's facial ID, where it's all of that is into one single experience, a seamless experience. And that's where, I think we are talking about the world going, and what role we as technology providers could play there. What is our role in this space that you foresee?
I think it's an interesting point you've mentioned, where the Amazon Mart. So where is the physical world and where is the virtual world?
And where do we come in?
And where do we come in, of course. Hopefully we have a lot of play. But that's quite interesting. It's about, I believe, from the technology world, people talk about platforms, they talk about APIs, they talk about ensuring that the right kind of an API and the payment flow is easily configurable by different merchants or enterprises, so that, as I said again, different customers would have different needs there. But from a fintech provider, really putting a pulse of saying that right from what I call the acquiring aspect, and there's an in-between thing when we look at some things like tokenization from a security perspective, how do you kind of build that in, really comes in. And then of course, the aspect of issuance, it's really about how do you kind of manage various instruments of customers. Handling them across, I think, is where the fintech providers could kind of come out with interesting solutions, if I may, that would meet different needs of different enterprises.
While we talk of embedded payment, it takes me back sometime like I remember Bill Gates saying, we are ahead of hardware, we are constrained by hardware. Software is often ahead of hardware, and it is they have to play a catch up, then we need to play a catch up. But now with embedded payments, if I have to apply, earlier we would lead the IP and then merchants would adopt. But today merchants are demanding IPs. They are coming up with more interesting use cases. They are getting very demanding as a segment, and all with the experience built in. But there's somewhere hidden they're talking about money. How does it bring in money? Finally, how does it bring in money? What's your take on that?
I think two aspects, right? The first, in terms of the hardware, when it comes to the ubiquitous mobile device being around, and of course it could be a tablet or whatever, the ability for you to kind of tap and pay, the tokenization aspect, I think, is clearly where you could see the hardware playing an equally important role in it. And that's where probably the security and the convenience part really comes in together, rather than you pulling out a card and then tapping. You just tap your mobile phone. That itself, I think, is an interesting area of evolution, including in-app payments, etc. So that's something that I am at least quite excited about. But when it comes to the other point of yours, saying merchants or digital enterprises finally want to look at sales and numbers, but it could be a social enterprise ensuring that their the numbers of funding that they would want also comes in properly rather. The aspect which I kind of clearly see is the drop-offs that go wrong, where the checkout rates or the acceptance rates are fairly low, is the way I would look at it. And there's some interesting aspects of tweaking if one were to do. Suddenly, what's called the orchestration layer, could you connect to different payment gateways depending on the availability, the price points, etc., to ensure that the enterprise or the merchant finally is able to convert the sale or the order or the funding for that matter. And that's what probably the digital enterprise is looking at and saying that how do you ensure when the customer is there, I'm able to complete the transaction and get the payment processed. And that area is where I believe a lot of investments are happening. And the report that probably you were referring to earlier about the embedded payments report, the enterprises, I think nearly 3/4 of them are kind of saying that please eliminate the inefficiencies, and that actually adds up to the cost of their own transactions is something clearly being literally asked by the industry.
Yeah, and I think that's while inefficiencies, and this is an industry which needs adoption, it requires evangelization. It's a right way to go, at least I feel so. And as far as merchants are concerned, I think there are going to be hand-holding that would be required, but somewhere it's leading into a zone where cost of inaction will be higher than cost of failure, and we'll have to keep on innovating till we reach the right solution across, right from, as you said, issuance to tokenization to backend you touched where it's OL, where you're going towards right-hand side of that. So it's the entire value chain of the payments which is getting impacted. And putting it in one box, what would be challenges that you foresee when you try to put it in one single product or a box? So because that earlier these were all segregated fields. Issuing was different, acquiring was different, the middle merging of with tokenization never happened. So that's a new thing that has come up. So how do you foresee challenges in this merging that is happening into one single interface?
I think it's probably an area which has not really been, or should I say, it's not chartered territory. But as we were discussing earlier, the physical and the virtual or the online world is merging. What's issuing, what acquiring are terminologies probably we've kind of brought in from our own side. But if you were to really look at it, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the enterprise or the merchant, the online merchant, and say, what is their requirement? If their requirement is saying that, hey, give me a solution which cuts across how I accept a payment, how I probably give a cashback to my customer, how if and when I were to issue a card and the like, I'll be able to manage that. And all three of them are finally payments. And with one view, it makes life that much simpler and easier for the enterprises, the way I would look at it.
So it's consolidation of experience at the merchant level. At the user level, it's one token, one device getting used in multiple places. Again, a very unified and a similar kind of experience wherever we go. And that's, I think, is a right thing to do for customers from what we were, as I said, if you want to do NFT, you had a different method. To do something else, you had a different method to a unified payment experience and embedded payment. Thank you, Srini. Thank you for joining in and your views. And thank you for joining in and watching this episode, the first episode of the series. As we come out with more episodes, do watch them. There'll be a lot of more exciting topics we'll discuss on embedded payments. Do download our embedded payments report. It will give you insights into where the world is evolving, how people are thinking, and help you refine your payment strategy. Thanks a lot, and do engage with us on our social media channels. Do tag us with hashtag Fintech Pulse by Comviva.